Hello YouTube, I'm Nix. Welcome to my channel. This is part 2 of the Let Me In story by Will Rain. Let's begin. Come on kid, let me in. I turned the volume up on the movie in an attempt to block out the voice. Help me, save me, let me in! The voice called out, growing louder by the second. It wasn't as though he was shouting, more like his vocal tones elevated in the same way I had turned up the sound on the TV. Hesitantly, I crept over the window to peer outside. I saw no evidence of anyone or anything. The whole neighborhood appeared to be at rest, but I still heard the man behind the door. Just let me in. I won't hurt you. I promise. I quietly carried the same chair over to gaze through the peephole. I froze in place after I accidentally bumped wood to wood while attempting to position my prop. I know you're in there, kid. Just let me in. Please. Once more, I climbed up to glance through the small, circular hole to see nobody out there. Only the deserted lawn and lightly crimson-stained driveway. Come on, kid. You can save me. You know that, right? I could not see the slightest sign of anyone or anything. I even attempted to look downwards through the tiny circular spyglass, theorizing someone may be crouched down, though the voice sounded as though it was coming from just beyond where I stood. I tried to convince myself that I had simply eaten way too much candy, or had possibly knocked myself senseless while sliding down the steps. After a few more minutes of the invisible stranger muttering from behind the door, I decided to just turn off the TV and head to bed. Even after I turned on the box fan I used to provide ambient sound to help me sleep, I still heard the voice, which now sounded like it was coming from directly behind my second floor window. I sandwiched my head between two pillows, but it made little difference in the volume of the cries for help. Don't go to sleep and leave me out here, kid. All you have to do is just let me in. It wasn't until I saw the light trace across the far wall of my bedroom, signifying my parents' arrival, that the voice fell silent. For years it carried on like that, always around midnight, and only when I was alone. I got to the point of practically begging my folks not to leave when they would inevitably head out for the night, and even requested a babysitter when they would. They agreed to my requests for someone to watch over me while they were gone, but that ended just a little after I turned 12. Sometimes I was able to arrange a sleepover with a friend, but there still would be those times I could not weasel my way out of being alone as the hour approached. Regardless of how often the voice would return, I was never able to just ignore it or push it to the recess of my mind while I focused on the other things. When my parents would be gone all night, the voice wouldn't stop until I finally drifted off to sleep, which always required quite a struggle to achieve. As the years progressed and my school days ended, I went off to college where I would have a roommate for a time. Though I would involve myself in any activity that would keep me from being alone in my dorm room after hours, there were still those times I would once again be at the mercy of the voice behind my door. No matter where I went in life, the stranger would follow, though there would never be evidence of his presence aside from the desperate plea and the knocks on the door. After college, I still maintained a roommate to avoid as many late-night visits as I could, though it would not keep them away entirely. I couldn't exactly forbid my housemate from having a life, after all. For some years, I would only have to worry about the cries for help around the weekends, as we had similar work schedules. Unfortunately, when my roommate decided to move in with his girlfriend, I was shit out of luck. Sure, I attempted to get another roomie, but my erratic and desperate behavior freaked out most of the interested parties. So, every single night after my housemate moved out, the knocking and screaming came. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the volume would crank up higher and higher every damn time. I even tried checking into a busy motel for a night, hoping that the crowded halls would keep it away, but no. As long as I was alone in my room, the pounding would begin again around midnight, without fail. For months, I fought against my sleeping sanity, but I could never block it out. Earplugs? Nope. Earphones with blaring music? Nope. Nothing would keep the man's begs for help from reaching my ears. I would just scream out myself sometimes, perhaps from the burgeoning madness of it all, or just the hopelessness of being unable to escape it. Finally, after far too many sleepless nights to count, I couldn't tolerate it anymore. As many times before, I gazed through my peephole to see nobody there, though the calls and knocks still echoed through. With a heavy sigh and a racing heart that felt as though it would crack through my sternum, I wrapped my trembling fingers around the doorknob and pulled it open. My jaw practically fell onto my chest when my eyes met the shredded figure before me. Half of his face had been torn away, leaving a redded skull with strips of meaty tissue where skin once lay. His left arm had been ripped from his shoulder, and it was hard to differentiate the bloodied muscle and bone from the clumped threads of the shirt and hoodie that remained. His gut was splayed open, with oozing intestines hanging to the ground in a scarlet pool, and both of his legs were a gruesome combination of moist ground beef and bone, with little holding them together. Somehow, his right arm was the only part of him free of any manner of injury, which he still held outstretched in front of him, with his fingers balled into a fist in preparation to knock once more. "Thanks, man," he said, trying to smile with the one side of his face that still had the ability to do so. "You're a lifesaver." We just stared at one another for a moment, before he just dropped to the ground before me. With a series of snapping and squishing sounds, his body twisted and compressed, curling and folding while it smoked, bubbled, and popped, shrinking down and dissolving into the fuzzy welcome mat and concrete pavement surrounding it. Within seconds, all that remained of the stranger, who was only visible through the open door, was no more than a charred crimson stain on the ground. I kicked at the damp mat that still wore the marks of many dirty feet, combined with the new red and burnt black, to find nothing but more stains hidden beneath it. Though my mind was reeling and my mouth still hung agape, I strolled across the pathway that led away from the house, nudging the mat towards the garbage can that stood at the end of my driveway. I picked up the carpeted sheet, which was no longer embossed with a welcoming greeting to those who may approach, only segments of what was once lettering in between the gruesome blotches. I held it by the lone, unblemished corner, studying it with my upper lip upturned in disgust before dropping it into my trash bucket. I stood outside, staring back at my house with my head in a daze. Could that really be all I had to do to put an end to this madness? Would my nightly visits finally be over? I began to cackle like a crazy person, the pure insanity of what had tortured me for years almost causing my fragile mind to fracture. I paced back to my open door, feeling as though my remaining marbles may indeed be rolling out of the confines of my noggin for good. Before I could reach the entry to my home, I heard what sounded like a pack of wild animals thundering their feet across the pavement behind me. I whipped around to see three hideous and deformed dog-like creatures scampering across the road towards me. Thick, phlegmy slobber dripped from their gaping maws as they sprinted right at me on muscular legs, covered in matted, dreadlocked fur. I screamed at the top of my lungs, hauling ass back through my doorway, slamming it shut behind me. I quickly flipped the deadbolt latch and pressed my back to the door while the beasts rammed into it from the other side. The violent collision with the meager slab of wood almost knocked me to the carpet. I could feel my chest heaving while the pulse throbbed beneath my skin. Every inch of my trembling gooseflesh felt as though it was lined with cold sweat as I gasped for breath. Wailing barks and growls, blended with something that resembled the sound a wood chipper might make if someone were to toss 50 pounds of frozen food into it, squalled from outside. For one reason or another, they did not attack the actual door after the initial slam from the quickly ceased high-speed pursuit. I did not doubt that were they to attempt to force their way in, my simple locks would not keep them at bay for long. I glanced through the peephole again to see the trio just pacing back and forth, still dripping that noxious drool with every whimper of their awful sounds. Each of them was quite large, easily 2 or 3 times the size of the largest dog I had ever seen. Their bodies and limbs bulged with rippling muscles, and their mouths were filled with jagged and misshapen yellow teeth. Every one of the 6 enlarged eyes glowed a vibrant orange beneath their furrowed brow. Once I finally managed to somewhat gather my bearings, while realizing that yet another sleepless night was ahead of me, I drew my largest kitchen knife from the rack beside my stove, sat on my couch, and just stared at my front door, still trembling from head to toe. Of course, I did not doubt that a poultry blade used for preparing a meal would provide little defense against that horrendous beasts. I just held my fingers tightly around the hilt, like a safety blanket, while praying that they would not attempt to force their way inside. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I awoke to find myself slumped across my couch, with my blade having slipped from my fingers, lying on the floor next to where I slept. I was still groggy and somewhat achy from the uncomfortable sleeping posture, but I was instantly aware that no growls or whines were coming from the outside. I could only hope the beasts have moved on, though I was quite reluctant to investigate. I hesitantly pulled my door open to reveal nothing but the stained concrete behind it. I still felt on edge for the rest of the day, but nothing else appeared out of place while I went about my daily grind. Sure, I would practically jump out of my skin anytime I heard an unexpected sound, or God forbid some neighbor's dogs barking, but I hoped things had returned to normal. Well, normal for my life anyway. It wasn't until I was on my way home, after dining with some friends after work, that I understood the new troubling situation I would be forced to endure. The sun began to set while I drove back to my house, something that never made me feel nervous before, not until midnight anyway. By the time I arrived on my street, the world was illuminated by the subtle glow of the moon, as well as the street lamps lining my neighborhood. It was then that I heard the barking and growling again. I darted my eyes to my rearview mirror to see that trio of ferocious, matted creatures speeding at me from behind. I slammed my foot to the floor, causing my Nissan to speed faster across the road to my house than I would have ever dared before. I was terrified at the idea of kids playing on the street or absent-minded drivers drifting into my lane, but I had to outrun those things and reach the safety of my home. I skidded into my driveway, feeling my right tires lift from the ground as the left one spun to a halt, tearing into the grass and dirt of my front lawn. My heart was hammering against my chest again while I sprinted to my front door. I could practically feel the foul breath of the demonic hellhounds on the back of my neck as I fumbled my key against the knob in my attempt to gain entry. I dared not look behind me until I finally achieved success, stumbling across the threshold and falling to the floor. I just skidded back across the carpet to thrust my foot against the door, slamming it shut. I quickly rolled over, reaching my shivering hand up to latch my lock, just as I heard and felt the hard slam of the monstrous creatures, beginning another night of their atrocious wails calling from outside. This is how I live now. I never stay out after dark, no matter what. I feel a panic attack building up whenever I see the sun begin to recede for the night, whether I'm safely behind my walls or not. I don't date. I don't socialize. Those things only lead to the possibility of being unable to put a door between me and my stalkers when the night falls. I can't say mine is a happy existence, but I'm alive. I wonder sometimes if I had allowed the stranger entry the first time he begged for it. Would I be where I am now? Or would he have transferred his curse to me sooner? Somehow, I doubt I'll ever have answers. There has to be a way out of this, right? If you take nothing else from this tale, just remember this. Yes, you don't know me. I have neither described myself, nor have I shared much about who I really am. You may not exactly know it's me, but should I ever come knocking on your door after dark, no matter how hard I beg, no matter how much I cry, do not even acknowledge me. And for God's sake, don't let me in. And that was Don't Let Me In, Part 2. Things really ramped up in the second part. Hope you liked it as much as I have. If you liked my content, please consider hitting a like and subscribing. It's the only way for the algorithm to notice me. Thank you for being here with me today, and take care. Goodbye.